Thank you for taking your seats. Please be seated. Thank you.
Good afternoon and welcome to the 652nd meeting of the Economic Club of New York. I'm John Williams. I'm the chair of the club and the president and the CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. This is the 652nd meeting of the club, which is remarkable because I think when I took over as chair of the club less than 2 years ago, we were on the 100th or something meeting. That's what it seems like the last 2 years. Obviously, this is a big year for the club. It's our 115th anniversary, and we'll be celebrating that throughout and recognizing that throughout the year. And throughout its history, the club has served as a preeminent nonpartisan forum for discussions on a wide range of issues around the economy, social, and political issues. So I just want to, before I get into the program, very briefly comment on the past 2 years. These obviously have been extraordinary challenges for everyone in the country around the world. But for the club, it's been a time we've also had to adapt and change rapidly. And I want to first recognize we've had the team, the Economic Club of New York's team, led by Barbara, has just an amazing job to switch gears rather quickly, move from the in-person events that have defined the club over its previous 113 years, turn those into a virtual format and do that in a way that both worked with the technology and served the goals of the club. So first, the team has done an amazing job, and of course the challenges aren't over. We're now transitioning to hybrid events like today's, which requires us not only to get the technology right, but also create that in-person interaction and dialogue that is so important. The second is, all the speakers. We have had more speakers over the past 2 years than we've had in any time of the club's history. We've had roughly 140 events going back to the early 2020, which is far more and a far wider range of topics and discussions than we historically have had. So we've had great speakers and panels, people willing to join the club on relatively short notice, sometimes, Barbara, very short notice to participate in our events, and that's really helped. And the last thanks I just want to give is to all the members of the club. Obviously without whom and their support, the club wouldn't exist. And the willingness of our membership to adapt and change as the circumstances change has made the club, I think, successful, and it makes me feel very optimistic as we move forward to a mixture of in-person, hybrid, and purely virtual events that we can really serve the mission of the club and make this club a place where people want to meet, whether, again, in person or virtually. So I do think it's a very exciting time of the club. This is my first in-person event, and we have a lot of really great programming planned, which I'll come back to at the end. Okay, so now I'll turn to the usual program. One is I want to give a special welcome to the members of our 2022 class of fellows. There's a select group of diverse rising next-gen business leaders, and we also have invited students from the City University of New York Graduate Center, Rutgers University, and Fordham University who are joining us today. Of course, we'd also like to sincerely thank our DEI corporate partners who've been working with us now for several years in bringing forward programming that urges diversity, equity, and inclusion across all sectors of our economy. So particularly, we have BlackRock, Bloomberg, MasterCard, PayPal, S&P Global, and Taconic Capital. And those partners in the room with us here today, we thank you for joining. Now, let's turn to the best part of this program, and that's going to be the conversation, and we're very honored to have President and CEO of TIAA, and importantly, a trustee of the board of the ECNY, Thasunda Brown Duckett, with us today. As TEI's CEO, she leads a company's missions defined by financial inclusion and opportunity, goals, values she's upheld throughout her career. Thasunda joined TIAA after serving as Chief Executive Officer of Chase Consumer Banking, where she oversaw a banking network with more than $600 billion in deposits and 50,000 employees. Previously, she was the CEO of Chase Auto Finance and National Retail Sales Executive for Chase Mortgage Banking. And earlier in her career, she was the Director of Emerging Markets at Fannie Mae, where she led the implementation of national strategies designed to increase homeownership among Black and Hispanic Americans. Thasunda serves on the boards of, no, this is a long one, if I can do this in one breath. Okay. Nike, Brex, Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights, Sesame Workshop, National Medal of Honor Museum, University of Houston Board of Visitors, and Dean's Advisory Board for the Baylor University's Hancomer School of Business. And she's a member of the Executive Leadership Council, Delta Theta Sorority, and Jack and Jill of America. And she founded the Otis and Rosie Brown Foundation, honor of her parents, to recognize and reward people who use ordinary means to empower and uplift their community in extraordinary ways. She's passionate about helping communities of color close achievement gaps in wealth creation, education outcomes, and career success. Format will be a conversation, which I'm very honored to be moderating. And as a reminder, this conversation is on the record. We do have media in the room and online. So without further ado, Thasunda, if you would come up here and join me. Now, we understand that we have about 2.5 hours to cover a lot of topics. So we'll. I
have questions for you then.
All right. So you've had a long career in financial services. We just talked about some of that. And you're approaching your first anniversary as CEO of TIAA. So coming into a new organization during the pandemic, did you have to invent your own playbook as a leader? And how did you navigate your first year?
Well, first, let me just say it's such a pleasure to be here and to be in front of all of you. Someone had to remind me last week that in 3 weeks I will be celebrating my 1-year anniversary. So I guess time flies when you're having fun because it definitely has gone by quickly. But with respect to your question, my playbook is consistent. When you think about being in financial services for over 20 plus years, I'm very clear on what needs to happen. You have to listen. You have to connect with your team. You have to set a vision, win hearts and minds, and make sure that you're surrounding yourself with the best talent as you think about your go-forward strategy. But what I will say is becoming a CEO with the new company at TIAA during the pandemic, the tactics to the playbook had to change. And so some of the things that I had to do, for example, when it comes to listening, my mode of operation is to be out there talking to clients, talking to every level of your employee base, doing side by side, seeing exactly what they do so that you're in the room with your leaders, you're not just looking at PowerPoint or what they're saying. You can actually say, I saw Susie and this is the problem that she was having. Well, you can't do that unless I'm going to everyone's home, knocking on their door and asking permission to come in. So you had to have new plays. And so one of the things that we did early on was have what we call coffee and tea. And what that meant is I would basically really disaggregate the organization, looking at your new hires, people that have been here for over 10 years, portfolio managers, people in operations, and a small group of 10 to 15 people. And it really is my chance to listen to hear what's on their mind and for them to ask me questions on things that matter to them. That allowed me to really understand what are the themes that you're hearing, regardless of level, regardless of department, what's consistent, but then also what are the nuances? And I think when you're starting a new company, nuances matter. And so how do I make sure that I'm getting proximate to the things that may be unsaid, but are really important to meeting the needs of your people? And so my point is tactics had to change, but clearly the fundamentals of what you have to do when you're leading an organization remain true. The one thing I would highlight is that when you think about all of the strengths that any leader has, and clearly when I think about my energy, my passion, focus, execution, et cetera, empathy is something that I would say I really amplified. And I say that because when you're coming in as a leader, you have all this excitement, you want to move forward. Your situation may not be the same as people furthest removed from you. And so it's so important to have empathy to make sure that as we're navigating a pandemic, as parents had to realize for the first time that maybe their children had a learning difference, when you had to deal with the murder of George Floyd and people are sitting in that, you have to have empathy and say, what is really on the mind of the people? The adage, I see you. And making sure that as I am asking people to set a new day at TIAA, as I'm asking asking people to never lose sight of what we do and why we do it and why it's important. We as a leadership team, and me, myself, as a new CEO, had to make sure that I've won the hearts and minds and I'm listening and making sure that I understand that we are all in uncharted territory, and that as your leader, I can promise you that I will listen. I will promise you that we, leadership team, will operate with agility, will provide clarity, and will provide the permission to pivot when needed. And clearly we all had to do that when we are navigating and still navigating this pandemic.
Well, you mentioned a few things right at the end that I came up a lot in our organization too, this clarity and the need to pivot. I mean, I'm guessing our organizations are similar. Someone's very analytical and people really want to have certainty. They want to know, my kid's going to be, am I going to have to come back to the office? I'm going to have to do all these things. So how do you manage both the clarity in that, like, here's the plan and what we're going to do, but we're also going to need to be agile and pivot as needed.
That's right. Well, clarity also comes in with the vulnerability to say, I don't have all the answers. Clarity comes into play. My predecessor, who I know you all know, Roger Ferguson, made an early decision before my arrival that we weren't going to have our employees come back to the office until the beginning of the year, of this year. And coming in, you know, I kept that level of clarity and confidence. And as we were navigating the return to office, really making sure that we're bringing in people to come test it out, all the new formats, get the feedback. So we didn't have that in and out shift for us. And now, you know, we are open and navigating with flexibility. Culture. You know, we both come from an organization where what we do every day really matters. And what's clear for all of the people that work at TIAA is our mission. And quite frankly, I've never seen anything like it, where employees at all levels know Andrew Carnegie founded this company. They know the story about retiring in poverty and not in dignity. When you looked at university professors that have educated some of the world's most brilliant minds, our associates know that story. And so when you think about the importance of culture, I think what has helped us is that we understand why we are here. We understand the seriousness of what we do every day. And I'm so fortunate that I did not have to remind people, as we're all navigating this pandemic, what's important for what we do. That's in us. And I think it allows us to retain talent. So when we look at our attrition levels, it still remains fairly low. I think it also gives us an outside advantage to attract talent, because I think people, especially our young people, are looking for that BHAG. They're looking for that bold, hairy, audacious goal. They're looking for purpose. And, you know, I get to give them a real BHAG every day that really matters in terms of what problems we're trying to solve in this country.
Well, we'll come back to culture and the importance of that in a few minutes. But what's it in your first year, almost first year? What's been the biggest surprise to you? You got a long career and
pandemic, interest rates, inflation. No, you know, I'd say the surprise is, I'd say on the positive, again, just being surrounded by people that are very passionate about our mission. It's something I have not experienced to that degree. I'd say the resiliency of the team, you know, navigating a pandemic, meeting your CEO one Zoom call at a time, making changes with respect to your leadership team, asking people to set forth a new day with your vision. That's a lot of change that I'm asking my teammates to go on a journey with me, at the same time navigating their change in their own personal life. And so though it's not the biggest surprise, but it is one that I think you reflect upon and understand that I am asking people to go on this journey where they may not have fully have interacted with me. I am asking people to really bring their full self and their vulnerabilities in order for us to be able to navigate this together. I call it a we thing. And so the charge or the assignment is not the surprise, because I was very clear and the board did a very good job along with Roger in sharing, you know, what this means in terms of me at the helm. But I think it's really understanding that it's okay to not have all the answers. It's okay to really lean on those who have a lot of expertise and having the confidence in knowing what I bring to the table, but the confidence in my ability to listen and to be able to act based on all the information that I'm getting is always something that I'm honing and refining.
This word change comes up a lot. And we were doing some outreach last year as we were doing some senior leadership searches in the New York Fed. And one of our employees said, can we just stop changing for a while? I got a lot going on in my life. There's a lot going on at work. Can you just stop the change or put a pause on the change? Have you heard that?
I have some of my teammates here. I'm not sure.
I can speak to that.
But change is constant. And what we do every day has to stay in motion. What's in motion has to stay in motion. And quite frankly, our participants deserve us to stay in motion. And so, yes, change is hard. Change challenges you. It makes you uncomfortable, but it's necessary all the same, because with change comes progress. With change allows you to hone your skill sets. It allows you to take that next mountain. And so I say to people, change is here and it's not going anywhere. And in fact, when you just look at the impact of technology, that velocity of change is going to continue to compound, quite frankly. The need to adjust and be agile and to be intellectually curious, which means you have to be open to change, is going to be some of the strengths that all leaders are looking for. But I also think it's okay, even the greatest players take time out. And so as we're thinking about how you navigate change, understanding the conversation around mental health, understanding that, people are navigating just unprecedented waters mentally, emotionally, et cetera, that I cannot tell you that we will pause on the change, because that won't happen. But I can tell you that maybe you need a day, or maybe you need 3 days, or maybe you need to let go, let Jane, who's super talented, have the ball. I think that is the conversation to lower anxiety, increase the confidence, and give leaders permission to say, have you optimized all of your talent? Because there's someone probably on the sideline saying, put me in, coach, because you need that help. And I think some of us as leaders also have to get comfortable with the fact that as you navigate change, part of your superpower is giving your power away. And I think that will also help when we're thinking about how do I deal with an ever-changing environment.
So you talked about mission, the importance of mission. You talked about culture. So I guess we're all talking about it as leaders, especially in the financial services sector. So is this different than before? I'll put a more provocative question. Has the financial services sector maybe focused too much on compensation and not enough on culture and these other things that you're talking about? Or how do you think about that?
Well, I haven't seen any reports or stats, but I'll give you my thoughts. I mean, compensation is always important. I think financial services, but I would also say probably every other sector, realize that our entire employee base have been working from home for 2 years. And if we're honest, during that 2-year period, everyone re-examined their life. Probably everyone, or at least I know, hit bottom during that time with everything going on. Wildfires on the West Coast, the murder of George Floyd, a national pandemic, and everything that comes with it. So to expect that as we're in the moment we're in now, that it's only going to be a conversation on compensation is woefully blinding. It's a blind spot. I think more important, people are asking different questions. And I don't think the question is only about, are we going to work 5 days a week at home, or 5 days in the office, or 3 days, or 2 days? I think that's a factor, but I think you have to go deeper into what are people really saying. And so what I do think that we're all learning is that people are saying compensation, yes, flexibility, yes, but who is this company? What problems are they solving? How do they solve these problems? Do they care about some of the things that I care about? Do they care about economic inequality? What are they doing around the climate? How are they working on mobility? Those are important questions that I think more and more people are asking in a real, intentional way. And I would also say that within financial services in all sectors, as we continue to make progress around diversity, equity, and inclusion, then people that know what it's like to have navigated their career being only in the room, or people who have navigated understanding nuances or bias, culture matters. And so I think the more that we have women in financial services ascending, the more that we have Blacks and Latinx and other groups, underrepresented groups, they're going to bring more than the X's and O's into these conversations. They're going to bring through the lens of perspective of what they've had to navigate, which means culture is going to more and more be on the forefront on what's on people's minds in order to make sure that there's a real sense of belonging, to make sure that we're still tackling some of the toughest problems that we're all trying to tackle. And that's why it's not just going to be about compensation anymore, but clearly compensation is still important, as you see with the wage increases that have gone on.
Okay, so that gets us to the next question. And you are one of two Black women running a Fortune 500 company in the United States. So we're in a room full of leaders. What do we need to do to make sure there is faster progress for more diversity in the leadership of major companies and their boards?
Yeah, and it's great to have been named CEO of TIAA at the same time as who I think is fantastic, and clearly someone like Ursula Burns who started it all. So I do have to make sure that I acknowledge that. Here's what I would say. If we just take a moment and think about it, every year, Fortune 500, Fortune 500, Fortune 500, Fortune 500. And there's only been 3 full-time Black women. I think currently there's not one Latina. We still have work to do. And so what can we do? Here are 4 things that I would offer up. First, it starts with a mindset shift. And that's even at the boardroom, because clearly the board hires the CEO. And so we have to make sure that in boardrooms, in the board of directors, that we're intentional about what is the composition of the board in terms of gender, in terms of ethnic representation, and also in terms of allyship. What does that look like? Because I believe that when you have allyship at the board of directors, when you have women and underrepresented groups as part of the leadership, I think you'll have different perspectives when you think about considerations on who is the best person to lead the company. So mindset, and that's also for CEOs. And the reason why mindset is also important is because you fundamentally have to believe that talent is created equally, opportunity is not. If you do not believe that, then you will not see that there is a problem. Secondly, if you believe that we have the mindset, then you have to disaggregate the data. We cannot fall in love with the law of averages, because that will say on average, X% of our organization is 50% women, 50% men. We'll lose the essence of that middle that's stuck for many women and people of color. You'll lose the perspective of different areas within your company, especially those that have P&L roles, those roles that are those power roles. Disaggregate the data. When you disaggregate the data, then you look at the policies and practices. Because once you disaggregate the data, hopefully you'll come up with different plays. And it's policies and practices that will sustain the progress of what we're all trying to do, so we don't make 4 steps forward and then 6 steps back, or that we don't need another murder pandemic for us to sit in it before we have to acknowledge that we have a problem. It's in the underlying chassis of how you organize and how you operate your business. And then lastly, clearly what gets measured gets done. And when we talk about measurement, I would say an insight, it's not just at the annual end of the year as we think about compensation, which is absolutely important, but it's also measuring when you're doing succession planning. What do the metrics look like in terms of the pipeline? We can forecast, are we going to make progress or not, based on the succession of who's in line 2 or 3 levels deep. When I disaggregate the data, do I see that in this role, we do not have any women that's on that succession tape? So my point is, when you think about what gets measured, gets done, one of the things that we work hard at, clearly at TIAA, and I'm sure all of you, is look at every path along the way, the diverse slates. Is it 1 woman or 2 women or 3 women on the slate? Are we measuring the progression of succession? Do we have a stuck middle? I think you have to look at metrics throughout your process, and that then can become a consistent rhythm. And I believe that if you have the mindset, if you disaggregate the data, if you challenge your policies and practices, and what gets measured gets done, then we, as Melody Hobson would say, will stop admiring the problem and we'll make real sustainable progress in areas like only having 2 Black women running 500 companies today.
That was a very powerful answer. I have no follow-up. But turning to last week, we had a historic event with Judge Jackson's confirmation. So what does that moment mean for you?
Joy. We have a great country. And I believe what makes our country great are the ideals of a more perfect union, not because we are perfect. And when you see someone like Judge Jackson and you see her credentials, you see her grace and her poise, you see her daughters in the room when your character is being attacked. And she smiles. And her daughter looks at her like, Mom, you got this. I hope that the joy that I feel as a Black woman, as a mother raising 4 children, I hope it's joy that everyone feels as Americans. I hope that every American says, wow, there's another first in our country, and we should be proud. And though there are still more firsts and seconds to make, it's progress all the same. So I think it's one of the proudest moments for our country and for all of us. And I think it's a conversation you can say to your children, progress. It's not in a straight line. It's messy, but it's progress. I would also say that when I think about my children, and I'll just speak to about 2 of them because they're around the same age, 14 and 16, Madison and Miles. Think about, my son was born in 2008 when Barack Obama was president. He's lived now through 3 presidents, and 1 was Black out of 3. He's lived through having a Black woman of color vice president. He now sees a Black woman on the Supreme Court, and he knows that his mom is the first woman CEO at TIAA and one of only 2. That is the lens of a 14-year-old Black male. That's progress through his lens. But then it's my job as a mother to remind him that when you expand this lens out, there's still so much more work to get done. So it's sometimes you have to zoom in and narrow the scope to celebrate the progress, but then we also have to quickly zoom out so that we can say, I think it was the 113th. That's still the progress that we still have to make for everyone. But it was a great moment, and I hope it was a great moment for all of you as leaders in this room. I truly do.
So we're now going to turn to the issues of retirement.
Great.
And your work. And so I think this group's very interested in hearing about what's the current set of issues for retirees. How well are people prepared for retirement?
So let me start with where we are and taking that lens more narrow when you think about 2020, 2021, and today. We know that over 2.5 million people retired earlier than anticipated. So when you think about that, you can say, well, what was going on? Well, clearly, with everything with the pandemic, I think, again, people made decisions during that time. It was a low rate environment. Inflation was very low. You looked at your budget and you said, I think I can retire. And I think I have enough that can get me to, some additional income that will happen later on with Social Security. And then the shock happened. Inflation is now, over 8%. Rates are increasing, wages are up. And so what you're seeing that some of those retirees coming back into the labor market. And I think you see that when you look at some of the stats where the participation rate for people over the age of 55 is up. And I think part of that is the acknowledgement of this may not be enough, especially no one was factoring a war. No one was factoring what we're seeing with energy, et cetera. When you look at it on a broader level, though, where are we in the retirement sector? 40% of all retirees are projected to run out of money in retirement. 40% of all Americans. 83% of African Americans in retirement do not have enough. And so when we think about the state that we're in, there is more that we must do when you look at this 40% stat. And so what's driving that? I think there's three things we have to look at. There's an access gap because we know that 1/3 within the private industry do not have access to an employer-sponsored plan, and that matters. So we have to work on policy and engaging to try to get more employers to be able to offer those plans. Secondly, there's a savings gap. I think there's $4 trillion income gap for retirees, and 25% of all Americans have no retirement. And so we have to make sure, again, what can we do as leaders, as policymakers, as corporate citizens, and as individuals to help improve the savings gap, because clearly Social Security is not enough and whatever your employer is providing is not necessarily sufficient. So we have to get individuals contributing. And then lastly, I'd say we have a guaranteed income gap. And clearly we know a lot about that being a leader at TIAA, but we know that with defined benefits all but going away, you only have Social Security as your guarantee. And so what we do when we think about guaranteed income, when we think about in-plan annuities, we think that it's really important because people are living longer. Women are outliving men. We know that you have to have something that can keep up with inflation, and you have to be able to have that replacement income that regardless of the market volatility, you can be certain that you have enough to cover your basic needs. And so I think those are three areas that I know we are laser focused on at TIAA. And I think it's something that all of us need to shine a brighter light on when we think about people starting their next chapter of life. And not necessarily easily being able to go back into the workforce. How do we make sure that they can truly retire with dignity?
Mentioned inflation a bunch of times. We are laser focused on that at the Fed. So
thank you for that focus. We are confident about how you all will navigate and work through it.
But when you think about, I know you've spoken on this a lot. You just talked about it just now. I mean, how do you help people think through these issues? Whether it's the inflation issue or do they have enough assets, or maybe the asset may decline and there's volatility, as you mentioned. I mean, what can we do that's help people with those decisions?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, there's not one silver bullet. I think it's all of us doing our part. And so some of the things that we could do, given that this is a room full of leaders, is to really look at your benefits and not just to say, I have that. I we should all look at, are our employees participating? Are they participating to full max, to get full maximum benefit? Are we having conversations around, are you on track? Replacement income, I think is very important. So I think there's more that we can do as employers to connect with people, knowing that many times, our average employee is trying to balance their whole, portfolio of today and tomorrow. But the importance of how people understand the power of compounding, especially the lower wage earners, is absolutely critical. And understanding the earlier they can start putting aside, thinking about their retirement, the more it will be for them and be able to have that level of replacement, and the more that they're not transferring that burden to their young ones. And then on the policy front, I think that there is more that we can do. And I think there's good progress that we are seeing with the Secure Act 2.0, but anything that we can do to give more tax credits to small business so that they can help and create employer-sponsored plans, anything that we can do when you think about the millions of people that may have exited the workforce and lost their ability to contribute to allow for them to catch up. Anything that we can do as you think about student debt, and maybe, within the Secure Act, as people are paying their student loans, could companies count that as contribution so that people are not delaying when they can start contributing to their retirement? So I do think all of us can have a voice when it comes to policy. But I also think that there's things that we can do in our own backyard on making sure that all employees understand that their benefit is for them. And the reason why I'm very passionate about that quickly is I think about my father when he was thinking about retiring. And I was early in my career. I did not know I was going to be a CEO. And we got on the conversation of retirement, and I happened to look at his statement. And when I had to tell my father, who made so many sacrifices, both my parents, and to tell him that he did not have enough to retire. And part of the reason is because he never participated in his company's 401k plan. And you're talking about someone who had worked decades at a company. And so to have to tell Otis Brown, Dad, you're going to have to catch up. You immediately have to max out. And we were still, trying to make it. I don't know how he did it, but he listened. But my point is, there are millions of Americans who have benefits that are sitting on the table because we employers have not done enough to connect with the guy who's driving the trucks or the person who's processing the mail. And so I think we also have to disaggregate data and understand who is participating and who is not. Who's participating at the right pace to have a better outcome and who is not. Because absolutely, we know that it's important to attract the talent, to retain the talent. And when people know that they're working for an employer that wants them at the end of the day to be able to say, because I've worked for all these years, you did right by me and I can move on, whether it's to another company and have this head start, or I can retire from this company. I think it matters. And I think there's more work we must do and can do. But I always think about Otis Brown in that story because I know that there are millions of Otis Browns today that have that same narrative that we have to disrupt.
It seems like, especially for younger employees, that this idea of preparing for retirement seems long ways off, and they're focused on
everything is long way off with them when you're young. So keep living. That's what Mom says. Yeah.
So it is a harder sell, right? When you're trying to be competitive, but also people are at least saying that they don't plan to stay with the organization all their lives. So having plans that portable things is something that I think is a big part of that. I remember working with Treasury Secretary Yellen, but back when she was president of the San Francisco Fed, she was very focused on these very issues about behavioral economics. How do people actually make decisions, and how do you kind of help maybe make the decision that's right for them through matches or other kind of programs? So we've done that at the Fed.
I would say our young people, our future is our youth. And I do think that our young people are very intellectually curious when it comes to markets now. I mean, they're talking about everything. So I do think the job to be done for us is to not dismiss that they're not interested, but to figure out a way to connect. And I think that is the challenge of today, because we do know the power of compounding. We do know that 40% of Americans will run out of money. We do know that more needs to happen earlier on in your career. And so I take it as an opportunity on that behavioral side that you mentioned, try to translate it in a way that our young people will understand $1 today is worth more than $1 tomorrow. And putting aside $1 today for retirement, putting aside $1 today to save and invest is absolutely preparing yourself for all of your hopes and dreams that you want to accomplish and all those passion projects on how you want to impact the world. You will have a better shot of doing that by making decisions earlier on and mapping out on their 401k or 403b on your first job is a great step to do that, because after all, it'll be the most money you ever made on that first check. So you might as well max it out, and then everything else is gravy on top of it. So that would be the other tip I would share for young people.
Terrific. Okay, so we're going to turn to a topic that's very big and among leaders in New York City. So how are you thinking about the future of work? How are you thinking about returning to office? And what's this new normal that we keep planning for?
Yeah, well, there is no back to normal, nor do I want to go fully back to normal. Here's what we all know, and I think we all experience some of these key facts. We all know that we had the technology, and during the pandemic, we were able to use it in a way that we never thought was possible. We know that we all dispelled myths, and we realized that all of our employees, I think from everyone I've talked to, we know that employees demonstrated that they can be productive working remote. And so the way I think about the future of work is that we just inherited more plays in the playbook. I think we learned so much more about our people than ever before. The realness, because after a while, we just got tired trying to dress up for work. And I think we all just like, okay, here I am. And so the future of work, I think, goes back to what is the future of your culture? The future of work is not about who's doing 5 days, 3 days, 2 days. I think it's about saying, let's take a look at who we are. Let's take a look at these new plays that we have, and how do these new plays inform and can be accretive to our culture? Because ultimately, whatever the go forward in the future of work, it still has to deliver on the needs for our stakeholders. It still has to deliver for the needs of all that we serve and for our people. And so I think that the future of work will require flexibility. I think the future of work will cause agility. I think we're all still learning. I know, we have personas where each persona we share, here's what we think your time in the office versus working remote, and it varies. But here's the point that I spent a lot of time thinking about. We all borrowed from our culture over the last 2 years, straight borrowed from it. The question that I think we have to ask all of ourselves as leaders and our teammates is, how are we contributing back to the culture in whatever format we have? If you are remote 100% of the time, how are you giving back to the culture? How do we make sure that when someone says they work for TIAA, it means something? It's not just to swap your screen. It stands for something that matters. And so that, I think, is going to have to be the unlock for us to think about, regardless of the flexibility, regardless of full-time, part-time, all the permutations, because I think all of it can work depending on your culture and depending on your company and what you're charged to do. But I do think we also have to calibrate to say, what are the new things we're depositing back to make our company stronger going forward? And I think those are the questions we still have to learn and navigate through as we're working through the future of work. I think future of work is the future of culture. And I think the future of work has to be accretive to allowing people to have flexibility, but also allowing us to continue to deliver the results and unlock innovation and deal with the ever-changing environment that's happening at an accelerated way. And for us, we do believe that having days in the office matter. And I think when you're not experiencing something, you forget. And when you get back, you're like, oh my gosh, I missed you. You forgot the human connection. You forgot that 5-minute conversation that you probably have not had because it was a scheduled Zoom call. And so there are things that I think we are reminding ourselves matters. And then if we have a different structure, I think we have to ask ourselves, how do we unlock those aspects if we are not in the office? And a lot of questions that I think we are still going to have to tackle around promotion, mobility, around skill sets, around, learning different parts of the organization. I mean, there's a lot of unanswered questions, but I think having the openness and the agility to get the data, listen to your people, and think about the best way to respond will be critical.
So we're back to culture. At least that's where we started. And I think we've learned a lot about ourselves as individuals, each other. You talked about that. As one of my colleagues at the New York Fed said, I do my best work in my pajamas. I didn't know that before. So I'll tell a little story from my experience. So I came from this other coast. There's 2 coasts of the United States. There's one 2,500 miles away. And I came here and I had this thing that we got rid of the dress code in San Francisco. You see, you can't do that here. New York won't let you do that. So New York is you wear business attire every day. That's who we are. That's our culture. And I challenged that at the time. Because I'm not sure if our mission said, our mission statement says that you were business attire. The thing that I've learned from my colleagues is the past 2 years have changed people's attitudes. They've changed people's attitudes towards what is it matters. What does it matter for work? What's it matter for us at home, family and friends? What's it matter for how we work together? So it seems to me, and you've talked a little bit about this is an opportunity for all of us to maybe let go of some stuff that we're carrying with us and really move forward from that. So how do you think about it?
No, I agree. I mean, this is to me such an exciting time to lead because not only are we leading through transformation when you think about technology, when you think about disruption everywhere, when you think about the problems that we have in front of us with the impact on energy, you have the rise in inflation. We know we're going to see continued rate hikes. We know we have a geopolitical. I mean, there's so many problems that we cannot control, but there's a lot that we can as leaders. And I think, in addition to the transformation that I talked about with digital and technology and disruption everywhere, in addition to navigating all of the broader issues, the human capital transformation is next to be disrupted. And the pandemic has accelerated that. And so when you think about it's an exciting time, you're right. It's, question everything, everything. Why do we do this? Why do we do that? But also, there are some things that were true yesterday and they'll be true tomorrow and they're true today. So don't lose all of that either, because that's also where your culture lies. And by the way, if some people like to dress up, let's not alienate them now, let's make sure we create a belonging environment for everyone. But yes, I do think it's an exciting time to lead because you get to ask a lot of questions and you get to give yourself permission to say, let's try something that we haven't tried before because it might just work. And I think that's what's exciting. And by the way, it's also what's required. You cannot lead through this environment with all of the things that we all have on our plate without being open to trying something different and being bold about it, because it might just work. And we know through disruption comes a lot of innovation. And I think we're poised for a lot of innovation, particularly around human capital.
Well, I think, again, people have challenged pretty much everything about work and how we should do it. I think the big challenge for us as we do this flexible hybrid, whatever we call it, model, is making sure that we don't end up spending 14 hours a day working.
Yes.
Because the virtual work ended up being a lot of hours in front of the screen.
That's probably the answer to your question earlier about what's been the biggest surprise. The amount of hours talking about HR issues I did not think that that would be the level of allocation that I've had coming in. I think, you're thinking about strategy, you're thinking about data, reports, execution. And we have spent a lot of time this year talking about human capital and HR issues, and that's not going away. Talking about mental health on a level and a narrative that we've never talked about before. So I think there's a lot of benefit, but that definitely was something that I had to allocate more of an allocation to, rightfully so, given the environment.
Well, and people, it's all about people.
It's all about the people.
And that's no different for us. I mean, we did a review of where we spent our executive committee time last year. We did a little percentage. And of course, the people, we call the people strategy and those things, return to work, and how to, that end up being the number one, number two things. For
all of you, right? Was that number one for all of you? Yeah, it's a big allocation.
Okay, we've only got 4 more minutes, I think. And I got to do this question. It's coming. Talking about transformation, you're talking about a lot about the change in the financial services. So should people, I'm asking a very specific question, should people be investing in crypto for retirement?
Well, how do you feel about it? I know you have a strong opinion. But I lead a retirement company, and it's all about making sure that we have high confidence that when people are ready to retire, they get the best shot at being able to retire with dignity. And so I think right now, crypto is not in our discussion, but you always have to stay curious, and you have to, understand it. I think it has a lot of volatility. It has a lot of uncertainty. And that's not something that, is a big focus for us as a retirement company. What people do as individuals with their disposable income and how they want to spend, I'll let you have an opinion on that. But clearly, leading a retirement company, you don't want to have a lot of speculative, investments in your portfolio or stuff that has a lot of volatility. You want to make sure you can operate with the level of confidence that our participants are depending on us to do. And I always put the asterisk at this time, because you also always have to be open as the market continues to evolve.
Right.
What's your thoughts?
I would just leave out at this time. But other than that,
Yeah, that's very strong thing.
That's really the focus on the people, what they need, what makes sense for them. Okay, last question. What keeps you up at night? So what do you believe isn't getting the attention of people in this room, or either in person or virtually, that we really should be focused on?
Well, I sleep pretty good. I have the Calm app, and that helps.
Okay.
After a long day. But in all seriousness, I'll answer it in 2 parts. What keeps me up when I think about the North Star is the economic inequality. And if we all tallied up all of our public commitments, if we all tallied up all the things that we're doing over the years, how are we doing as a collective when we look at our report card? Do we see the economic divide reducing? Do we see more people of color on a path to create wealth, or are we going in the wrong direction? Recognizing that women make 82 cents on the dollar and are retiring with 30% less, we have to retire inequality, period. And so that keeps me up at night. I hope it's something that keeps all of us up at night, because ultimately, if we are able to close the economic divide, we will unlock tremendous future GDP for our country. We will unlock tremendous opportunity, because people are not carrying that load of not being able to just make basic needs met, not being able to meet their basic needs. I would also say that as a company, leading a company that's over 100 years old, just staying laser focused, that competition is all around us. And that acknowledgement that your past success, the strength of our balance sheet, our mission, all of these things that make our company great cannot be the only thing that you are betting on to make your company relevant in the future. And so I think for me, operating with this sense of good paranoia, operating with this good sense that competition is all around us and it comes in all different forms, those that are core and those that you may not even imagine. Transformation is here. The velocity of change, like I said, is compounding. Human capital, reskilling, all of the things that are needed absolutely keeps me up. But I will say what allows me to go back to sleep, in addition to that Calm app, is who I surround myself with. Because at the end of the day, no one leader can make all those decisions and do it well. It takes a village. And I'm incredibly blessed to be surrounded by some amazing people at my leadership table and at all levels, but also being able to tap into organizations like the Economic Club of New York and other organizations that I'm a part of. You said it was a long list, but I would say I'm just a student. I'm always willing to learn. And so when I think about the portfolio and the things and how I spend my time, I think it's important so that you can calm yourself down is to say, am I learning? And I think as a CEO at this moment, it is absolutely critical that I stay learning, that I stay curious, that I keep my pulse on the market, that I keep my pulse on all of the ever-changing dynamics so that I can truly lead this company with excellence and hopefully do our part to be a leader in lifetime income and closing this retirement gap.
When I talk to employees about what they look for in a leader, we over the last year, we did a lot of outreach to employees virtually. And the common themes are, I want a leader with compassion, which is kind of a new word, I think, for many people. And they want a leader who inspires. So thank you for being a leader with compassion and a leader who inspires. This has been an amazing conversation. Unfortunately, I know Barbara's going to tell me the time is out. So thank you so much for joining us. And this has been terrific.
No, it's been my pleasure. Thank you for listening.
So that's just an amazing conversation with so much wisdom, but we are out of time. So my job is right now to provide the comments about who we have, or do I do this now or at the end? Now is perfect. This is new for me. Okay, so we're gonna have a whole bunch of speakers coming up, and I'm going to go through these quickly because we're about to get lunch served. So on April 13th, we have Brad Jacobs, CEO of XPO. He's going to talk about supply chain issues, another very important topic, and also thinking about new technology in the industry. And then on April 14th, we have Rochelle Walensky, obviously the director of the CDC, and she'll provide insights on COVID and what we can do to better prepare for the future. And then on April 19th, I have my friend and colleague, Charlie Evans, the president of the Chicago Fed, will be speaking in person. That should be great. And then on April 20th, the next day, we got Brian Deese, the director of the White House National Economic Council. So that's a new addition to our list. And then we have on May 3rd, Jamie Leverton of Hut 8 Mining Corporation, CEO there. And on May 10th, we have Hugh Frater of CEO of Fannie Mae. And then on May 16th, we've got John Rogers, chair and co-CEO of Ariel Investments in person. So we got a great lineup over the next couple months. Of course, keep watching the screen. We'll have more announcements. And I'm guessing we're going to continue with this pace of events that we've been doing. Last thing I'll just mention, I'd like to thank the 345 members of the Centennial Society. Their contributions continue to be the financial backbone of support for the club. And it's really important to enable us to have this wonderful, diverse program, both now and the future. And finally, we should mention that we'll sending out a post-event survey, and we appreciate you taking time to give us feedback on this event or any future events. So again, let's all enjoy our lunch together. And for me, at least, the first in-person event for the club. Thank you so much.